Hello, Philosophy 100. This is Introduction to Philosophy, and today we are going over the Pre-Socratic Sophos. These early Sophos are often attributed to be proto-scientists. So they are the firsts of rudimentary, what we would now call modern science, but theirs was not specialized in the form that ours was. So Soccio begins this chapter by saying, as early Greek civilization became increasingly refined and sophisticated around 500 BCE, a new kind of thinker emerged known as the sophos, from Greek, which is the word for wise. These wise men, and they were almost exclusively men, patriarchy and the society, etc. But at least after this, there were others, like Hypatia was a woman. Nevertheless, from exclusively men, asked increasingly sophisticated questions about all sorts of things, but especially about natural processes and the origins and essence of life. Although mythology and religion continued to play important roles in the lives of most people for centuries, these first philosophers were noted for their attempts to use reason and observation to, quote, figure out for themselves how the world works. It's found on page 59, written by Soccio. So this mythological distinction, the abandoning myth to sort of trying to reason to figure it out, is a bit controversial, but this is sort of the traditional narrative. And it's controversial because of colonialism and the idea that something is more philosophical if it has a more literal or quote-unquote rational implication and rendering in the philosophical ideas, and this sort of other civilizations like Africa, East Asia and things of that nature, India, and this is sort of the traditional account where philosophy develops out of the West, the Greco-Roman era. But nevertheless, Soccio continues and he says, in a wonderful book called Philosophy as a Way of Life, French philosopher Pierre describes how in the ancient world a true philosopher was usually viewed as someone out of step with daily life. To be a philosopher was to be different. As you learn more about the ancient sophos, you can decide for yourself whether this difference is a good or not. So then he continues to sort of talk about this kind of even the stereotypical traits of what a philosopher is like today, sort of this absent-minded person who walks outside and doesn't see things around them because they're too busy looking at the stars or whatever formula they're working out in their head. So he says the sorts of atypical traits Hadot has in mind include a lack of concern with such normal things as practicing a trade, having a regular job, pursuing wealth, or desiring fame and power. Page 59. Then he continues, the sophist was someone who devoted himself to asking questions that other people thought had already been answered by religion and mythology, or were unanswerable and thus a waste of time. the sophists lived and spoke in ways that were interpreted as showing disregard for conventional values and set him apart from regular folks living normal lives. And skip forward a little bit, he says, "It is hardly surprising, then, that one of the earliest popular images of philosophers is the stereotype of a shabby, unkept, absent-minded, starry-eyed dreamer and an asker of silly questions." I think generally today's society is out of touch with what philosophy is and what philosophers are, but if they do have some sort of connotation, this does seem to be a stereotypical one that I have seen. So then, and also that the questions are not applicable, they're meaningless for today's society. So then Soccio continues, he says, "Socrates, perhaps the most recognized example of the ancient Western sophists, was even called, quote, unclassifiable, with a Greek word that I don't know if I'm pronouncing this one right. I think it's etapos, because he was a philosopher in the archetypal sense, a person in love with wisdom. In Plato's Symposium, Diotima, an ancient woman philosopher whom Socrates referred to as one of his teachers, says that wisdom is not a human state at all, but a divine level of perfection and knowledge. If these ancient commentators are correct, the Sophos is actually a stranger to the world." What do you guys think about that? What do you think about the idea of wisdom being divine? True wisdom. Not just a purported self-aggrandizing, testimony of "I am wise." What do you think about this idea of wisdom being something that is at least in part partaken in the divine? I feel that's a fascinating topic, and this theme will at least become relevant as we continue, and especially when we talk about a priori knowledge and things of that nature, and moral intuition. So I think that's a fascinating quote.